We're talking with Elsa Frank. It might be helpful if you'd begin by telling us a little bit about life before the war, your earliest years as you remember them.
Yes, I grew up in a little town with 4,000 or 5,000 inhabitants in Germany. Excuse me.
The name of the town?
The name of the town is Höchst. Höchst im Odenwald. So if you can repeat that, you already know some German. And as you all know now, by now, I'm 80 years old. And I came to America when I was 26.
Okay, let's back up a little bit because we want to kind of take it chronologically.
Okay, yes.
Tell me a little bit about your early education.
All right. My, wait a minute. I'm going to read you that, but I have to translate it into English. This is in German.
You know, it might be easier if you just kind of paraphrased it, if you read it, because we are limited on time and we want to get everything.
What is the book that you're reading from?
This book was brought out from the Germans in my little hometown, and tell you all about the Jews who used to live there from the 15th century on, and had a lot of pictures in it. But as I told you, I grew up in a little town, and I have to tell you that in that little town there were very few Jewish people. My best friends were non-Jewish people. And actually, my very best friend, we were as teenagers day and night together. Her name was Kade, and I will never forget the time when she came in 1935 to tell me that her brother has joined the Nazi movement and has forbidden her to be my friend. And all these things which happen now are unbelievable, and I never could understand it until it was too late.
How old were you at the time that your friend brought this message to you?
Oh, she was, we were 20. Yeah, she actually was a year older than I was. But then there were quite a few things I did to tell you something else. Why can't I find that? I went to school 3 years in grammar school in Höchst, and then I went to a bigger town where I had a better education. And can't believe it like that.
And you say you had a better education when you went to another town. Was this because of the restrictions on Jewish children?
What?
Was this because of the restrictions on Jewish children?
Oh,
at that
no,
time?
no, no. You have to remember this was a time in 1930. We didn't know anything about the difference. This is what I can tell you.
Now you moved to the other town to obtain a better education?
That's right. My parents, I had to go by train from the time I was 9 years old in order to learn more than what I could learn in 8 years of grammar school in Höchst. Well, I wanted to tell you, we were Germans in the true sense of the word, but we were also Jews. Everybody in Höchst knew that we were Jews. We had a synagogue, and we went there, and other people went to church. Lots of times I went to church with them in the morning. They went with me to synagogue. I'd give you an idea which is completely different from what you know. I realize that. But I have to be objective. I have to tell you how it actually was. I was an only child, and had a very happy childhood. I swam in the Mümling. Mümling was our little river, and belonged to a girls' club, which I later became a leader. My father belonged to a club, well, kind of bridge club, and my mother belonged to a little Kaffeekränzchen. See, it's so hard to understand, for you to understand that, which means she belonged to a place. They had in the afternoon they had coffee and gossiped, and besides that, my father played violin and mouth organ. My mother sang, and I played piano. In Höchst, there were, besides my family, about 20 other Jewish families. And we lived in complete harmony with other Christian people. Anti-Semitism was not known. My friends, my girlfriends and boyfriends, they were either Protestant or Catholics. And in our neighbor's house, I was like I was at home. When they were sitting down to eat, I didn't even knock on the door. They had 5 children. I was an only child. Just was sitting down, ate with them. Okay, you want me to tell you a little about school?
Please.
At that time. Mm-hmm. I don't like to repeat myself, but I guess I have to. After 3 years in grammar school, I took a train every day, this 9 years, to go to a bigger town. I told you that. It was actually a school for girls school. And there was not only where you learn German and history, and algebra, but also we learned French and English. And of course, my parents had to pay for that. In our class were two Jewish girls, one other and I, and under 15 girls. And we all went to our respective religious education. After I finished the school, I used to take a train every day to another town to go to a business college, which I finished in 2 years, and then I became I was in a I had an occupation in a tire factory in the office. And the main office of that where I was in Frankfurt, a big town, where the owners of the factory lived. It's like here you have, Kroger, the factory, the main seat is in Cincinnati. So, and they were also Jewish. After 1933, some of the workers in the factory I was working came to my office and wanted to make unauthorized changes in the pay. They wanted to have the people who were Nazis getting more pay, and I was the head of the payroll office. So of course I couldn't do that, So, but then that already became very serious, and my bosses, who lived in Frankfurt, had me to go to Frankfurt, where from there I had to figure the cards, the payroll cards, and send them back with the checks. For 6 months, I stayed there. If you don't understand that, I'd be glad for you to.
You might want to go into a little more detail
Okay.
on it.
And it was a funny thing which happened when I was there for the first time in Höchst again. I went to that factory where I used to work, and the man who did the payroll office was sitting there, and I asked him how long he has been there. Of course, he didn't know who I was. And he said, "Oh, I'm here since 1937. And you know what we had to do? We had to send all the payroll cards to Frankfurt, and there was a girl sitting there and had to figure them out and had to send them back to our town." I said, "Yeah, no, that was me." Was I, actually. Well, now I'd like to tell you how it came that I came to America. In Höchst, where I came from, well, it was an old Jewish man who happened to be the brother of Jacob May. And Jacob May came every few years, came to Höchst to visit his brother. So of course, when he came, he had become a millionaire. He started with nothing. And he had already left Germany in 1890 because there were about 12 children, and they had to, the poor Jewish family. So when he came again in 1936, we children always were so happy to see an American millionaire. We always went to see him, and he asked me if I would like to come to America. And this is very hard for everybody to believe. Even in 1936, where things already were very, very bad, I hesitated to have to leave my country, where my great-great-grandparents were born. And always the little hope it cannot go on like this. Then, after a few incidents which happened, I wrote to him to get my papers, and he sent them right away. And I left then in 1937.
Did you leave alone or with your?
I was an only child. I left alone. My mother had died in 1936, half a year before I came to America. And that was another incident which made me think. When my girlfriend passed me on the street and did not dare to tell me how sorry she is that my mother died, because she was afraid to talk to me. If somebody would have seen it, they would have sent her to the concentration camp. This is what I really want to bring out here. You have to try to be, to understand what would you have done if you would have, if it would have happened like that. Would you have dared to go and say, and then they would have sent you to concentration camp? Could you have taken that step? This is what I feel. As I say, my story is a little different. But I left my father. I did not tell him that I leave. I couldn't. And the last time when I saw him, I said goodbye to him, but I left the next day. And my father was sent in 1942 to Theresienstadt, where he died where he was killed. I had no idea until about 2 years ago that where he was killed. But I had a document which these people who brought all that, they found out where all the names of the people who went to Theresienstadt were and what happened to him. I have the document that he was, of course I said he died exactly on the day in 1942, and the name, his real name, the name of his wife, my mother, with a maiden name even on, exactly, this is one of the Germans, you know, they had all these dates. So anyway, I wanted to tell you what made me actually change and wanted to get to America as fast as possible. There were several incidents which happened. One was on New Year's night, we went on those narrow streets. Höchst had there is a little town, had narrow streets, you know.
This is New Year's night of
New
what
Year's
year?
night,
Which
yes.
year?
Hmm?
Which year now are we talking about?
That was 1936. And we passed on the street, other people and other young people, and everybody said, Happy New Year. Of course, he said in German. So, Prost Neujahr. And one of them who passed me said, Happy New Year, you foreigner. Well, even then, it's hard to believe, it did not register. I thought he's probably drunk, he has no idea what he's saying. That's what was my idea. And then, of course, I think of another incident when it was Passover. You all know what Passover is? And the Jewish people came out of the synagogue, and the Christian people came out of the church. And my father came out, and there were some hoodlums standing there, and so one of them started to make anti-Semitic remarks to my father. And another man who had just come out of the church told those anti-Semites. He said, "Now, Max and I," Max was my father's name, "Max and I have right now prayed to the same God. I just, maybe he will forgive you, but I cannot." So I thought, well, as long as people like this still speak out, that was always my hope. It cannot happen what did happen. But anyway, it happened, you know, people passed me on the street. I was not bodily hurt. Nobody hurt me. That was, you have to think, it was 1936 to 37. But people who knew me all my life, they went on the other side when they saw me coming. These were the things which were really unbelievable to me and unreal. We had a Jewish teacher. Actually, he was a rabbi. In my opinion, he was one of the best rabbis that ever was. Also, he did not have the rabbi title. He taught me more in Jewish history and Hebrew than I ever thought I would need, but I did it. I taught Hebrew here. He was not only a teacher of Jewish children, he also had a choir. All the men in that little town belonged to that choir, and he was the diriger. He was the person who taught them all the songs.
Cantor?
Huh?
Cantor?
No, not cantor. You have to know that, and I think this is very hard to understand. It had nothing to do with Jewish. He was
Choir director?
the director of the choir director of all these men. It had nothing to do with being a cantor. He taught them all the German songs and everything you can imagine, because this is, I wish I could make that clear. I can tell that it is very hard for, are you Jewish? No, well, it's
Go
very,
ahead, this is for posterity, so you go ahead and make the point.
well, yeah, well, he was very much loved by everybody in Höchst. And when he had his 25th year jubileum, that he was for 25 years, they gave him a ball, you know, where everybody came. If it was a doctor, a lawyer, if it was a plain worker, everybody came to honor him on that day. Well, I also have to tell you that also my boyfriends were mostly non-Jewish. And one especially, he died in 1929. It was a very, very hard time. When I say boyfriends, it is not like today that, you know, we were just friends, we went to the movies, to dances. But I told you that my mother died in 1936. I come from one thing to another.
Well, let's go back to the period where you said that Mr. May was asking you about coming to America, and
well, okay, yeah, and so that you want me to tell you now when I went to America, I left in. Well, he told me, he sent me the papers, and I did, and he did, and I went in June '37. I took boat to go to America. And even then, it was a terrible thing for me to leave. Also, I knew I had to leave.
where did you arrive?
What is that?
Where did you arrive?
Where?
What part of America? What did you come
in
directly
New
to
York.
Okay,
Yeah, I came by boat.
understand.
Yeah.
But did you go from New York directly to?
I was 2 weeks in New York with friends who had come, a few Bushmills. Mr. May.
Let's wait till you.
Okay.
When we last left, you had arrived in America.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning coming to Nashville and with a job.
Yes.
Okay, let's go into that a little bit.
Yeah. Mr. May and his daughter-in-law came to pick me up. I had to go, of course, by train from New York to Nashville. I think it took about 26 hours at that time. But they were on the station, and Jack May, his first thing was, you can already start tomorrow in the office if you want to. It was on a Wednesday. To me, that was just the greatest thing that could have happened, you know. And his daughter-in-law said, let her wait till Monday. I never forget that. Those little things you can never forget. But anyway, would you like for me to tell you now when I went back to Germany the first time?
Well, now, is that several years later, or we kind of want to make sure that we...
Well, I came in 1937. In 1962, I went with a group to Europe on another girlfriend from here.
You know, it might be easier if we kind of cover the period between 37 and 62,
Okay,
and then...
37, 62. Well, I wasn't married. I came by myself. In 1938, my fiance, actually, we were engaged in Germany, but we didn't know if we ever would see each other again. But I went to every Friday. I was invited from the Mays for dinner, and Jack and Mortimer May was his son, and he was also great in every way to help. I could tell you more about him. And they said, well, don't you have a boyfriend, Elsa? And I said, well, I have somebody in Germany, but I don't know, you know, I need papers if he wants to come here. And then Jack said, I'd give him the papers. And that was not only, and then Mortimer, his son, spoke up and said, now, you gave Elsa the papers, I give her fiancé the papers. See, and I was so afraid I would not have anybody to bring him over. But anyway, he came a year later, and 2 months later we got married. We were the first refugee couple who got married in Nashville. So anyway, then 3 years later, we were parents of a son, and another 4 years later, another one. We have 2 sons. One lives in Charlotte, married, has two. I have two grandsons. The other one is in Colorado. He's not married, but I went to see him.
During this period where you settled and were married and had a job and so forth,
Yeah.
your lives at that point were fairly secure. Did you, once you were able to have
Yeah.
your fiance come to America, did you have any, did you try to find out about what was going on still in Germany?
Oh, of course. We can imagine. My father was still there, you know, and we also brought over some cousins of mine because we got papers for them too, which they live now in San Antonio. But also, we found out the last letter I got from my father. I still have it in case you were interested. Was I got a letter in 1942. We had written to him that he was a grandfather. And he wrote, he was, in the meantime, they put him in a home for aged people. And of course, I couldn't write anything. They got the middle name for the Jewish men was Israel. You know that? And for the women, Sarah. It showed that they were Jewish. That also shows you how stupid the whole thing was. Well, the last letter I got from my father, it was came from Max Israel Herzfeld. Yeah. And he was, he said how happy he was that he had a grandson now. He hopes maybe, and then of course you could tell that he had no hope ever to see him. Okay? But and in 1942, he was sent to Theresienstadt with all those people.
Had you been given the middle name Sarah before you came over, or was that after?
No, I did not have that. I was still, my passport still says I'm German, you see. Nothing at all about that. And also, well, I did not tell you, I had a lot of help from the mayor in order, when I wanted to immigrate to America, the mayor from our little town came to our house on Saturday night and said, Elsa, I heard you can go to America. I want you to go as fast as you can because I know a lot of things. And I will help you in any way I can to make it easy for you, which he did.
So getting back to the point here now where your children had been born here.
Yes. And by the way, the youngest one is born on the 4th of July. Yeah. The newspaper had in the paper, a firecracker was born to Mr. and Mrs. Elsa Frank.
Well, now at that point in time, when your children were born and
Yeah.
ready to be educated and maybe
Right.
receive some Jewish training, what kind of decisions were made at that point between you and your husband?
Well, my husband worked also in the Mayhosri mills first, but very short time. Then he sold vacuum cleaners, Electrolux. And then he had a little store where he went to people and sold ready-to-wear things. He died in 1956, heart attack. My children were 11 and 15. And if you believe I had a hard time, you can believe me. I worked in my Mayhosri mills. And then when I was pregnant with Norman in 1945, I quit because my husband had done pretty good. Even his English wasn't very good. And I also tell you, when he sold Electrolux, he was a very good salesman. But one day he came home and said, well, did you sell anything? He said, yeah, I sold an Electrolux to a woman. I demonstrated and I told her everything. And when I was through, she said, well, I'm going to take it. Also, I didn't understand the word you were saying. So now, I also was very, very lucky here. When I was here the first year when I wasn't married, I had room and board in one of the very well-to-do families. She wanted wanted to have somebody at night to stay with her in her house. And in the morning there came two servants, a man and a woman, and they gave me breakfast, and I was sitting there. I felt like I was very, very lucky. And I stayed there till the last day before we married, Benno and I married. And she couldn't get over it. How could we get married on that little money we're making? But we made it.
Well, now your husband became fairly prosperous. And
No, he didn't become prosperous.
you said he was a good salesman.
Well, he made good living.
Okay.
I could quit working,
Uh-huh.
but then when he had his first heart attack, I got a job again with a Kroger company. I was 20 years there.
Now, you mentioned that, as I said, your children were born in Nashville
Yeah.
and educated here. What kind of religious education did you?
Oh, we belong to Temple. Oh, yes. And, well, actually, Melvin, the oldest one, was bar mitzvah. And then the youngest one, when he was 13 years old, my husband had a heart attack, and I just couldn't get through to see myself having a bar mitzvah, and he didn't have a bar mitzvah. But of course, both of them were confirmed. And the oldest one, especially, he is very active. He doesn't even belong to Temple, he belongs to the Conservative, and his wife. They're very active there.
A lot has been written about the children of survivors, but what
Yeah.
about the experiences of the children of refugees? How foreign is your experiences to them? Are they
Oh.
very real in terms of what you've told them? Or?
They have a tape also from what I told, how I grew up and everything. They are very, very interested. And of course, oh, you're talking about my children.
Which
I'm
on as they
just
were
thinking
growing
of my
up.
grandchildren
Oh.
even. They know all about it. Yes, they know. Can believe they're very, very interested in it.
Now, since they've gone on and had lives of their own,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess what's appropriate to ask, how this all, how you view it now, because so many years have gone by, and yet it's a situation that's so real, and it's probably.
There isn't a day go by where I don't think about it. But again, I left 1937. The rest of it, which was so horrible, I wasn't there. But of course, believe me, I know what happened, and we will never forget, and I will never, ever forget it. And I told them that when I came there too. And I will try to forgive some of the things which happened. Some of them you can never forgive, but forget you can nothing. I told them that. Well, I didn't even tell you when I came back for the first time in 1962. Would you
Please do.
Okay. In 1962, I told you I went with a group to Europe, and one of my best girlfriends went with me, and our first stop was London, where we were supposed to stay for 3 days. And that was something I had in my mind. I didn't dare to tell anybody. I do want to go back and see how it is now in Höchst. Didn't tell. But after one day I told the group leader that I would like to meet him in Germany again. That was the next stop. And I will meet him, but I want to leave 2 days earlier. So I left and I went by plane from London to Frankfurt. Ever heard of Frankfurt? Good. And from there by train to Höchst. And as close I came, as more upset I became. And even tranquilizer, which I had never taken before, didn't do any good. Well, I get up it's about 3/4 of an hour train ride from Frankfurt to Höchst. And when I got out, even the train station was like I had it in my mind. Even the children with their books, waiting for the train, the same train to take them to the same town where I had my education. And I went down the Bahnhofstraße. Bahnhof is railroad, the street, and where I knew where everybody used to live. And of course, nobody can imagine how it was, how upset I was. But I went down and all I wanted to do, what I was telling myself, is to go to the grave of my mother. See, we had a Jewish cemetery there in Höchst, but not only the people from Höchst, the Jews, but from the whole neighborhood, other little towns, they were buried there. So this is what I told. I went down the street and went to the office where I knew where the mayor used to live, where the mayor had his office, you know, what do you call that? What do you call it?
City Hall?
Yeah, city, exactly. And I went up the steps, and 2 men came down, and I asked them if they know where the mayor was. And one of them said, I am the mayor. Just go upstairs and take a seat. I'll be back in a minute. So I was sitting there across our former house. And of course, tears coming down. And the mayor came back. That was in '62, you have to remember that. I excused myself for my behavior, and I told him that I came from Höchst. He knew he was not from Höchst. He was from a little town. At that time, they were so afraid to have maybe a Nazi would become a mayor that they sent from somebody from another town who they knew beforehand that he wasn't a Nazi. Is that clear or not?
This was at the time of the trials.
The change,
Sure.
yes. And he told me he knows all about the Höchster Jews who lived here. He gave me a book where he wrote in deepest deepest remorse, dedicated to you, and with a hope of peace, something. But he never was a Nazi, you see. But that's what it is that he felt. Anyway, look, I could tell you, I could sit here all day and could tell you. I don't think you want me to do that, do you?
To tell me what?
Well, what else I have to tell you? It's so much. Well, I asked him, I said, I only came back, I want to go to the cemetery where my mother is buried. He said we tried to keep the cemetery in good condition, but quite a few of the stones were demolished in those terrible years. Well, like a miracle, my mother's stone was completely all right, and I have pictures of it when I went there. Well, when in the next room was the secretary of the mayor sitting, and she heard that, and she had heard about me too. She was, of course, a lot younger, but her mother was one of my good friends too. So she called her mother, and by the time I came down those steps, half of the inhabitants were there to welcome me. They couldn't believe. They were so happy that I had come back. And they asked me about other Jewish people, because everybody knew each other. Not only the people you knew everybody's dog and everybody's cat. That's how that place was, you know. So I told them, from someone knew, they went to Israel or to America, and then they asked me about others, and I said, it's a 6 million which you have killed. I told them that. Well, the second man who came down with him, when I asked about the mayor, I told the mayor that nobody would know me after 25 years. So he said to his secretary, call up Paul Kreider, that was his name. And in came the same man who had gone down with him. And the mayor said, Paul, who did you say that lady was? And he said, oh, that is Elsa Herzfeld. Her mother always gave me bread with her homemade raspberry preserves. And so everybody knew then who I was. And that's when all these people came. They asked me if I had seen Kate. That was my best girlfriend. And everybody knew how close we were as teenagers. So I said, no, does she still live here? Oh, yes. So they called her, and we met in the middle of the street. And she said she never could forgive herself what she did. She had married, and she had married, it was actually also a good story. She married a man, a lawyer. And Kate, that's her name, Kate, had told me shortly after I left how she found out how rotten Hitler and everything included is. Her mother had a little grocery store, fruit and vegetable store, and had sold a cauliflower to an old Jewish lady living next to her. And that had been observed. And the Nazis came in the middle of the night, took her mother to prison because she had sold a cauliflower to an old Jewish lady. I just want to tell you that to give you an idea how things were. Well, she went to that prison and asked if they would take her instead of her old mother. But there was a lawyer there who helped her to free her mother and also let her go. And this lawyer became her husband. And he told me that there is not a day going by where Kate is not talking about our former friendship. And that was the happiest day of her life. In the meantime, we write, and of course, we are friends again. See, I guess a lot of people would say, how can you be friends with somebody again? Yes, I can, because I know how it was. I also told her that it had come that far. That I cannot forgive. That some of those highly intelligent people didn't see beforehand what was in store for. But they all went with the flow. That, I said, I can never forgive. But I can understand that you couldn't tell me you're sorry my mother died. Well, you want me to quit?
No, not at all. But by the same token, now when you mention that, okay, you mentioned that you saw that you had some compassion for your girlfriend's situation, and that her hands were basically tied, and that things had gotten to that point. Once you were over here in relative safety and others like you, there was this outrage that was being communicated to American government officials that we've been told that they chose to look the other way. But can you kind of talk a little bit about what was done to alert Roosevelt and so forth?
Well, we all know that Roosevelt did not do what he could have done. Again, they said now they heard the stories, those horrible stories from what happened, and as an excuse, they said they couldn't believe it, that actually the things which happened. We know that Roosevelt did not do what he could have done, as much as I admired him in most things. We were worried about, we went to other Jewish people and begged for affidavits for our relatives. And some of we could bring some over, but you probably can hear more about that from other people. We were so worried, you know. We thought, will that ever end?
By the same token, you mentioned that this has been now 50 years, well, 60 years ago, that this has happened, and you've had 2 generations that have grown up since then, and to the point where you have people today actually saying that it never happened. How does someone who's been through it?
Listen, who said that would never happen? It did never happen. I know there's somebody in Chicago, or a professor or something. Well, when I told them that in Germany, they said they couldn't believe that there's still some people who said it didn't happen. I don't know if you would find in Germany somebody who will tell you it has never happened. I don't know. I didn't meet any of those. Maybe there are. But the ones I've found, they try to do everything to make it a little bit easier on them to understand, not to understand, but to get through with it. They are just feel as bad. And I tell you again, I'm talking about the people I have met now in those years.
But you hear that being said now, even in this country, a lot of
Yes.
among the hate groups, they use that as justification for.
Yeah, I know that. They say it didn't happen. And I told them that, those people in Germany, I said, do you know there are still some people who say it has never happened? And they said, well, we can't understand that. It's all so, you know. How anybody can believe anybody who will say it did not happen. These people, you always have people like this.
But do you just look at that attitude as a bunch of crazies, or do you see this as a serious threat to?
I don't see. There are too many people who know and who will not believe that, who will not even argue about it, because it just doesn't need any arguing.
But this is the last generation of people who are around to.
Well,
we'll have it on tape, but is there going to be a danger later on? Because we are, as the years go by, we are so far removed.
Well, look, I cannot tell what will happen later on, but as I was always an optimist, and I do not believe that anything like this could ever happen again, or that anybody ever would say that didn't happen. It's all documented.
Do you have any particular sense of fear about the talk of the reunification of Germany?
Yes, I wouldn't say fear. I am, I would say, more anxious. I had a letter the other day, yesterday actually, from that mayor who I told you in 1962, who I met, and we became great friends again. Well, we never were enemies, because he's a very big socialist. And he wrote me a long letter, of course in German, what he thinks about it. And he said the fear is there if they become big again. We do not hope, we do not think so, we do not hope so, but it's always in the back of our mind. And he is for that they will be together. He is for that, but he also thinks and hopes that they will. He does not. He feels like I do. I do not believe that anything will happen again, that a man will, like a Hitler would come. But we didn't believe it at that time. I remember when I said, very first, when they talked about it, I said, okay, let me see what he can do. You see, not ever thinking what could actually be. Because, you know, Germany was in a terrible shape. You know that. There was no work, nothing, and he promised work and all that. And then before that happened, that he was talking about the Jews also, although we should have known, because he had written Mein Kampf. Nobody read it. See, nobody read that. But he had written it out, exactly what he would do and how he felt about the Jews. We just didn't pay attention. We German Jews were too ignorant. I wouldn't say ignorant, it was just such an impossibility that things like this could happen.
So you don't find it incomprehensible that we didn't pay attention because it just...
Well, that America didn't pay attention?
At the time, that you're saying that Mein Kampf was kind of dismissed as the work of...
Well, yeah, of a madman, you know. But at that time, very few people, well, I don't know if anybody could see what really would happen in 1942 and all the concentration camps and the gas chambers.
We've touched quite a few bases. If you were to be able to speak with everybody one-on-one who'll be viewing this tape, and what is of all the things that you've had to tell us, what is the point that you would like to leave with everyone as being the most important, if they were to listen to nothing else that you had to say?
All right. I tell you one thing. Let your voice be heard before the fear of speaking out is there. Do you understand what I say or not? Don't wait till it is impossible to speak. Speak when you see something, and when you see something on the right side, which is bad, don't put your head towards the left side, and don't look at it, but look and do something about it. Don't wait till it is too late, because that's what we did.
Is there anything that we've left out that you feel is important?
Well,
I mean, obviously we can't cover it all by any stretch of the imagination.
No, I know. Well,
have we covered the important points?
Well, you look at different things. There are so many things which happened when I came back. You know, I had a very good friend who was the oldest son of a restaurant, which was the best restaurant in Höchst. And I went there and asked where Franz is, that was his name. And the waiter said, oh, you know Franz? I said, yeah, I knew him before you did. And she said, well, he lives in a nearby town. And in the evening, when I was there, had my supper, was with some other people around, she told me I was wanted on the telephone, and she had called Franz and had told him somebody wanted to talk to him. So when he got over it, who was on the other side, we spent a day together in Frankfurt before I met my other people again. And all we were talking about was former times. He was of course not Jewish, you realize that. And we were talking about when we went to another town with our bicycles to a dance, and I had told him, drive ahead so the Nazis here won't see us together. And, well, as I say, so many things which I could tell you. We met in the meantime. He had married, and I have been in his house several times now. And we always, every time that talk comes about Nazis, which you can't help, he had never done anything but he had also never done anything to avoid that horrible happen. And that is what he felt guilty about, that he did not open his mouth. Every time that it came, he went out of the room and cried. He could not get over it. That had happened, because we were, just as good friends as one can be. We knew it. Well, a lot of more things. I think maybe Hedy Lustig told you about the time a year ago, last November, when we were invited, all the Jewish people. You heard about that, yes. Did she bring pictures too?
I'm trying to remember, I believe she did have some pictures, but not from that trip, I think from...
Oh, not from that trip? Well, they did not know what they can do for us, you know. We, of course, had room and board in the best places, which they paid for. Everything they paid for, except they didn't pay for the airplane ticket. Some towns even did do that. They do that now in every town practically. And they wanted to come to people back and show them how they feel now. You see, and I, for one, appreciate that. You cannot blame these people who weren't even alive and try now so much to do something for those Jews. They didn't do anything wrong. I mean, you know, they weren't even alive. And they brought out that book. And that's what I wanted. This is the synagogue in Höchst.
One thing that I would like you to clarify is that you've said at several points throughout our conversation that basically somebody else might tell us different, but this is your story.
Yes.
Why do you feel that because you are a refugee as opposed to a survivor? Is that what you're saying? Where your story differs from somebody else's? Or?
No, because very few people are 80 years old who have lived in Germany in a little town where there was no difference between Jews and everybody loved each other. It was just, as I told you about that rabbi in Höchst. They made a street and called it Lehrer Kahn Weg, a street called after him, you see. And these people didn't know him either, who did all that, but they heard about all that. So, well, what else you want to know? It's enough, isn't it? But you see here, this book is what they brought out, the things which I had no idea. All the houses in here, of all the Jewish people who lived there. Our house is there, everybody's house. And they have all the dates when the first Jews came to Höchst, all the names. And of course, our name is there. All the business that when there was a wedding, for instance, Lehrer Kahn's oldest daughter got married. That was there was a wedding where everybody was invited, and it was in all the papers. I don't know if I make myself clear. It has nothing to do with Jewish at all. And they have all that, and I have it too. I have everything about it, which is, of course, for my children and grandchildren. One of these days, when I have time, I'm going to translate it, but I don't think I'll ever do it. But I teach German now in Hillsborough High School. Adults, people from 18 to 80. It's my 20th year I teach. Usually I don't teach in summer, but they asked me, some people want, so I have one summer school on Thursday. And I have about 10 people coming privately to my house. And I did teach Hebrew here in Temple. Until now they have enough cantor teachers now. I used to teach the Bar Mitzvah boys. But I learned that in Germany, of course, to learn Hebrew. Now I don't speak it much, but I read it and can translate the prayer book. I was also voted Woman of the Year of my Business and Professional Women's Club, and have a lot of good friends, and I feel very good here, very happy.
That might be the appropriate place to end.
Hmm?
I said that might be the appropriate place to end. I think that's a very optimistic note.